Okay, so I'm going to hand you the clicker, all right?
Okay, cool.
Yep. Okay, everybody, let's get a seat. We're going to get started. Everybody out, getting the coffee. Come on in. Get a seat. We'll get started. Okay. Hurry, hurry, hurry. Ah, right, okay. You people out having coffee, come on in. Like curtain cats. Marcus, go yell out there, get everybody in. Okay, I think we'll get started. It looks to me like we got a quorum here. So the people that don't know me, I'm Don Klock, and I'm a professor at Rutgers Business School. I'm going to just take a minute and kind of introduce our panelists today. While you're thinking about the panelists and other stuff, and as you're going through it, if there's a question, write it down. We'll take questions at the very end. For you people that are virtual, you can also submit questions. And also people that are virtual, there is a polling. You'd be able to poll. It says survey. It doesn't say polling. So we put a question up of X, Y, Z. You say, look at surveys. Go down to this session, Global Strategic Sourcing Now and in the Future, and you can participate in the polling questions for the audience. This is what we're going to do today. We're going to do two things. One, we're going to talk about some of the latest trends where the global companies are sourcing from and why. And then secondarily, talk about some factors that one might consider when they're moving from one country to another and or considering near sourcing, such as Mexico, or reshoring back here to the home country. In this case, it would be probably the United States. So hopefully through our discussions this morning, you'll get a better feel for that and have some good takeaways. I'm going to just briefly introduce our panelists here so you know who they are. Dr. Walter Kemmsies. He's a global economist. He's a foremost expert on ports and infrastructures. He's an advisor to the U.S. Department of Commerce and Supply Chain Competitiveness. One fun fact about Walter, he's from Brazil, but he's worked all over the world, Europe, Latin America, and Asia. So he has a lot of great experience that you can learn from today and or ask questions about. Our second speaker is going to be Ron Marotta. He's the Executive VP of Yusen Logistics. He has over 30 years of experience in various logistics roles. He serves on multiple industry and governmental logistics boards and councils. A fun fact is when he's not worrying about how to get goods in the United States, he's a lieutenant in his local fire department. So when he's not saving burning buildings down, he's saving your goods getting into this country. And then Tim Taylor, Senior Vice President, Chief Supply Chain Officer at Jockey. He has a very broad role, directs and manages Jockey's end-to-end supply chain operation. He oversees global sourcing and production, corporate planning, product and material development, technical design and services and distribution. A fun fact, he has some strange little accent, but I'll let you try to guess where he might be from.
Down south, man.
Okay. And then Stephen Mensch, Senior VP from Toshiba in Global Commerce Solutions. He has over 25 years of experience in supply chain. He's responsible for leading all operational activities, including manufacturing, execution, procurement, supply chain engineering, inventory planning, and business operations. He's a fun fact that he's a Jayhawk, and for you people who don't know what that is, there's this little school in Lawrence, Kansas that guest plays basketball, I guess. So you can ask him about that later. So, and myself, as I said earlier, I'm a professor of supply chain management at Rutgers Business School. I actually spent about 40 years in business, and I didn't know what to do, and I became a professor. I was the chief procurement officer for Colgate-Palmolive. I decided to pursue a second career in teaching. Just one fun fact, I've told some of you the story many times. A friend of mine last year encouraged me to put a course on Coursera. It's a massive online training program. I did do that during COVID when I had nothing else to do 2 years ago. I now have 18,000 students in on the Coursera. It's kind of an amazing story. You have to ask yourself, you can talk to me later about what does this mean to education with brick and mortar. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to first start, we're going to have a little question here. So again, the people that are virtual, you got to go to surveys, and the question will be up here. I'd like you to participate in the survey. So go ahead and go into the area where it says surveys, find the global sourcing, and go ahead and submit. The question is, since the start of COVID, has your company changed your strategic sourcing strategy to another country? A for yes, and B for no. We'll just give you, this is an easy question. I know many of you may not be directly involved in this, but just answer it from your company's perspective, okay? So we'll go ahead and do that, and we'll take a quick look at the results. And here we go. Interesting. So is this final? It's continuing to come in. Okay. So here's an interesting thing. Since the COVID, has your company changed your strategic sourcing? 100%. Now we've seen numbers. All of us have worked on this, as we know, anywhere from 57 to 75. So this is the highest number I've ever seen. So what about you, Ron?
Yeah, we're seeing the same thing. The switching is constant and consistent.
All right. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn it over to Walter. He doesn't have any slides, so I'm going to give this to Ron. But go ahead and just, he's going to give us kind of the background from an economics perspective.
Yeah. Normally I have slides. In the last, I'd say 3-4 months, I've done I do quite a few presentations. And I had to ditch the slides because it took way too long to update them every other week, it seems like. So, because what is going on changes on a day-to-day basis, but there are some overarching themes that I think are worth focusing on and not worrying about the latest, inflation data or what happened to gasoline prices or whatever. The facts are that right now we're still pretty jammed as far as logistics is concerned. The ports in Southern California have about 70 to 80 ships, I'm not sure the exact number today, waiting to get into a berth. So some of them are close by, the rest of them are further away, theoretically because of environmental reasons. You don't want ships sitting there for 3 weeks, burning fuel into the local population place. But when you're hiding them 60 miles away or so, it may be politically convenient, but it is extremely inconvenient for those of us who work in logistics. So, having said all of that, let me just go through a couple of these big themes. The first is, when you look around globally, Europe did roughly the same thing the US did, probably not as big, but they gave everybody a lot of money. We gave people a lot of money, and this was around May, June of 2020, and I think we all know the consequences of that. Massive amounts of spending, people buying all kinds of things they needed to work from home, and things because they were bored silly. How many fishing poles do you need? So what happens is when you look at the data globally, as well as for the US, trade has grown faster than industrial production. How can that be? And the answer is we drew down inventories. So inventory shortages have been a problem. They've been a problem here. They've been a problem there. And those of you who have operations in other parts of the world have probably seen that, not only could you not get a new pair of black leather shoes in the US, you also couldn't get a pair of new black leather shoes in China because everything they were trying to produce was leaving the country. Having grown up in Brazil, and Brazil was China when I was a young man, we always had that problem. Damn Yankees bought everything. We even ran out of toilet paper once because of Johnny Carson. You might have recalled that he once made a joke about toilet paper shortage, and a panic ensued, and the stores were stripped bare. Well, this spread to Brazil, which was a big supplier of toilet paper to the US at the time. So we have not caught up yet with rebuilding inventories back to where they were. In the US, for the big retailers, the inventory to sales ratio was back to $1.35 of inventories compared to a few months ago when it was $1 of inventory per dollar of sales. So that's an improvement, but some of it may very well be because the stores have the wrong things in them. I don't know why the forecast went wrong, but if you have staff did this forecast, tell them to go to the Transportation Safety Agency, the TSA, on their webpage. They give you every day how many people they processed in the airports the day before. And you can compare it to previous years. And the numbers are much higher than they were a few years ago. And as you see that happen, you might guess that people are spending their money differently than they did before. And if you want other indicators, drop me an email or call me or something, because there are too many of them. So how the ball got dropped, I don't know. But the other thing that went wrong is, nobody was paying attention to the port gateways they were choosing. It is always a bad idea to use one port. Unless your only distribution center in the entire country is next to that particular port, there's no excuse for using one port. So I have clients that I've worked with, 95% dependent on the ports in Southern California, and we've gone to a 5-corner strategy because we have learned that the gateways, particularly Southern California, are done. When they get to 950,000 imported TEUs, the 20-foot equivalent containers, it shuts down. The gateway, it's not the port itself. The port's great. The terminal operators are great. I got good friends at SSA. They operate terminals there, not a problem. The problem is too many ships coming at the same time, and the roads being so narrow that what you're getting is a fire hose from Asia into a few straws coming out of the port. So that's not going to work. Now we've got very likely a work slowdown at best. Maybe at worst we see a strike from the stevedores around the West Coast. Again, I quote a good friend of mine, Rick Gabrielson, who built up the global supply chain at Target over 28 years. Use a 4 to 5 corner strategy. So let's go on to the inflation issue. So inflation was inevitable because we're a capitalist economy. We use prices to allocate the capacity to the competing uses. And we don't build capacity like, essentially, I think a better way to put it is, nobody builds a church for Easter Sunday. Easter Sunday, you put the tents out there, and when next Sunday comes, you take the tents down and everything's fine. So what do we learn from this over here? Well, we put the tents up by some of the ports, and every Sunday was Easter Sunday. And it got really ugly. It got dirty underneath the tents, got trampled. It wasn't working very well. People were getting rained on because the tents weren't built to be up there day after day. And that's what you're seeing in the ports right now. So you're seeing this also in almost every segment of transportation, every segment of logistics, and you've seen it in real estate, where there has been an excessive scramble to get industrial footprint, far more than really is going to be needed in the next few years. There's just, when you look at the charts of retailer sales, they are 20% higher than they were a couple of years ago. A lot of that spending is going to go away. People do not want to live that way. They do not want to stay home and watch smell-o-vision. They don't want to, buy fishing poles. They don't want to stay at home. They want to go out. And that's what the data says. It's what we did before. And if you're trying to position yourself, you need to think in those terms. So there are a couple of policy things I want to talk about, and one of them is the deal with China. Get out of China. I don't mean you should not produce in China. You should. You can produce in China and sell it in Thailand or sell it in China. But if you're going to sell it here, you're much, much better off going someplace other than China. It is the government's policy. China has a regime that's not very, let's just say, good about playing with other people. And so that is the policy. And there are a couple of other places to avoid, and one of the obvious ones is going to be Russia. one comment there is this could last a very, very long time. You know, we had some excellent people from Stratford that, or I forgot what they're called now these days, that Amy's brought in. And I think they gave us a pretty good way of thinking about the risks. It's worth going back and reviewing those notes that Amy had forwarded. But so where do you go next? And there's a lot of talk about going to Mexico. Be very careful. As long as President Obrador is in power, you're going to have a problem. He has taken the production of fuel and the production of energy. He's taking it away from foreign companies that have done a great job and is giving it back to the state-owned companies that are very inefficient and very expensive. So I was a big proponent of the shift to Mexico, but the people that I'm advising on supply chain, we are very worried. We don't think that with Obrador in power that this is going to be a very sustainable, situation. So maybe further south from Mexico is probably a better option. Colombia, maybe Costa Rica. My bet really would be in Colombia. And don't tell the Brazilians I said that because they wouldn't like it. Thanks for your time.
I think we have a question, Ron.
Yes. Normal is zero. Yeah, everything is planned in advance, unless you have a weather event or a labor event, which are relatively rare. You don't have any ships waiting, mostly because they coordinate between the ports and the ocean carriers, and I think they do a pretty good job. More so on the East Coast. In the East Coast, pretty much all the ports sit in the middle of swamps, all these rivers coming together, and they have to coordinate. Any ship bigger than, say, 8,000 TUs, you need to talk to the port and engineer the ride with the tide to get in. Most of them, not all of them, but that's, and because of that required appointment system, it kind of keeps the number of ships that end up waiting to get a berth at zero, effectively. And Ron can probably add more comments on that. He's been looking at this more than I have.
Hey, Ron, go ahead.
Thank you. Well, for more than 2 years, the leaders of the SCLA have spoken every week in a session and give a brief on how we're doing, what we're doing, yeah, the mic's on. All right. We've been speaking about challenges that we face. Right? We faced a lot of challenges over the last 2+ years. Right? I often say, and I feel bad about it, I've never really had great news. Right? Today, we're talking about some things that aren't good news. Walter just mentioned something about major country of production, China, right? It's not just the production, it's not just what we see in the country, but what they're doing throughout a region and really throughout the world. Right? So if you look at the area in navigable waters outside of China and in the Pacific, they happen to be building a lot of bases, if you will. I'll talk as loud as I can. Batteries. Anyway, so they're building bases in and around the islands, right? And they're militarizing, putting naval vessels, draft, or putting weapons, or putting munitions. Thanks. There's some potential with that little island nation, Taiwan. And there's one thing that's not a well-known fact, right? So if, for example, Taiwan falls to their neighboring country, right, that country is going to control, 70, 75% of the ocean carrying capacity, right? So that's something to keep in the back of all of our minds of the threats and the issues. It's not just a geopolitical issue, but it's a potential impediment to global trade. Because if that one country, which owns Costco, OOCL, numerous other carriers, Evergreen is headquartered in Taiwan, Yangming, Wanhai, a bunch of other carriers, right? Regional feeders. They, by virtue of possession, would control a huge ability for any of us to move our goods anywhere in the world. So you think the rates have been high lately? It's one of the risks that we could have, as well as they could interrupt the trade for any of their competing nations. Early on in the pandemic, we started to see production shift to other countries, right? And they became aware of it. So what happened? All of a sudden, the raw materials for furniture, apparel, buttons, zippers, whatever it might be, suddenly became in short supply in Vietnam, India. There was a little bit of a battle on the border with India, and there were two armies fought and some soldiers died, right? India then started to have some more problems getting supplies, getting material that they needed to produce, whether it be carton stock, packaging, or components needed to make furniture. Vietnam experienced it. We had a little disruption in Myanmar. Who landed in Myanmar right after that happened? Some of the military aircraft with communications equipment, internet control systems, all types of stuff. So there's a lot going on in the world. Walter alluded to it, that we all need to be aware of. Okay, some of the other things Walter also mentioned about situation in Ukraine, right? Ukraine produced not only food, grains, and different food products and whatnot, but also fertilizers, some rare earth gases, and some other minerals and stuff like that, but wiring harnesses. There's huge production of vehicle wiring harnesses that went offline, right? A company that's over there, it happens to be one of our customers, is completely off, as well as other, components needed for manufacturing. So it's not a small issue, this little dispute that's going on right now, that the country's been overrun, and it's not going to resolve itself anytime soon because of the infrastructure damage, right? And the damage to hospitals, education, houses, apartments, everything else is phenomenal, right? One of my other assignments in my company is humanitarian assistance, and I'm responsible for our humanitarian assistance for our organization for Ukraine. My boss, our CEO in America, happens to be Ukrainian. And I've had some really, really heart-to-heart discussions with him, and he's told me about what's going on over there. It's going to take decades to rebuild that country if it does remain free. If it doesn't remain free, the nation of Russia, right, which also supplies, we had a big organization in Russia, is also going to be an impediment to global trade as well. So these are not small matters that we should all consider as our companies buy and source products throughout the world. So one other interesting area is North Korea, right? North Korea seems to be emboldened and for some reason empowered because they don't seem to be a check right now on their desires to be in the news. They're launching all kinds of missiles, right? That could easily, again, disrupt the neighboring countries that are our allies and the sea lanes over there as well if they start firing more missiles or they start to test nuclear weapons again, right? So that area is unstable. Right now, we talked about labor trouble in the United States, the potential of a strike. In South Korea, there's been a trucking strike, and we still get cars, automobiles, electronics, a lot of good products out of Korea that are made there. The truckers have been on strike for over a week. The military has just been ordered, I think they put up 100-something drivers just to start to move freight. So whatever the reason is, whatever the wage issues are and whatnot, that's also another problem with moving supply chain products from Korea. You see a lot of this technology in the sky that helps us to move information, technology, monitor our ships, everything else. Some of our adversaries have been targeting some of the satellites as well. Those operate the global weather satellites, they operate communications, they operate GPS and everything else. So these are areas that could impede the supply chain and the ability to move products throughout the world, right? And then one of the other situations is the consistency of the pandemic, what's going on, and some of the reasons why we need to look at nearshoring, onshoring, building stuff right here again, believe it or not. And I'm a person that's been in the international supply chain for 41 years, right? And I can't believe, spending my life traveling around the world, that we are at this juncture and at this point right now. It's serious, right? Because some of the essential products, we talked to one of our members last night, they can't get chips to manufacture their forklifts, right? The automakers can't get chips to manufacture the cars, right? A lot of the electronics, the phones and everything else, everything that we use and everything that we, run our lives on, we can't get the components for. I mean, really, this is 2022. Whoever thought that we would be at this place at this time where there's no certainty anymore in the supply chain? Right now, today, the email I got this morning, our organization, big company based in Tokyo and in China, we have huge operations, lots of people, thousands of people. Only 20% of the workforce now will go into the office in Shanghai, for example. They're allowed 50% as they relax some of the rules and regulations. Excuse me, but the people don't want to risk getting COVID. And it's not so much that they're worried about the illness or the sickness or the problems, but what they're worried about is getting sent to a facility, if you will, where they must be confined and separated from their families. So they're hesitant to return to the office. They're hesitant to return to work. Still doing the work. They're still working like crazy from home, but this is disrupting documentation. It's disrupting a lot of different things. And this is not just our organization, but it's many organizations, if you will, right? So the longer the zero tolerance continues for COVID in China, the greater the impact. Are they moving freight? Yes, they're moving freight. Is it as free and fast as it was before? No, not really. And it is, causing an impact, and that's the reason, because the people are scared of being put in a confinement or containment for isolation due to getting COVID. And they don't necessarily always get treated real well. So some of the other things that are important, and some of the other things that we should think about, the ocean carriers have been running their ships now for 2.5 years. Many of these vessels are sort of newer, right? The age of the fleets are younger, but they normally have to go in for maintenance and dry dock. Most of the carriers have not stopped the vessels, and they've been running them. At some point, they're going to have to start pulling them out of service, which is going to restrict the trade and going to also keep the prices up and the rates up, and also be an impediment to moving cargo around. So we should remember that as well. So one of the other things that Walter mentioned about inventory, a lot of our customers that we found out have brought in all different types of products. Many cases, they're not only in their own distribution centers, they're in outsourced parties. Not everything is visible to them, and that's one of the reasons why there's been uneven distribution of products, because certain things are in warehouses and they're not always in ERP systems, and they've sort of lost, some of the companies lost a little bit of control. So everybody right now is trying to fine-tune their inventory. We see everybody going through their purchase orders across all of our customers and deciding what's important and what needs to be ordered. So we're going to continue, I think, to see probably for at least the rest of this year, a uneven distribution of goods and accessibility for products that we need in the store is not going to be everything that we hope it to be. So we hopefully by next year we'll start to see an evening out and an improvement. So that's it for me.
You had a question, I think.
Question?
Second audience question.
Okay.
Okay, you can just give that to Tim. Okay, just so, this is the second audience question. Again, it's in the polling under surveys. You go down to global. If you haven't done it yet, the global sourcing area, and the question will be here. So this is another polling question for the audience. You can read it, but I'll just read it to you, and then please answer it again as you think your company is doing. So what is your major current sourcing strategy? A, stay in China. B, China +1, for example, maybe China plus Vietnam. Nearshoring, as I said earlier, Mexico is a common place. Reshoring to the US, or some combination of the above, E. So go ahead and do that. We'll take a look at the results and see what it says. Yep. Yep.
Yeah, there's something to that, right? Because if you have an unreliable partner, right, and you have to look at government regulation, right? If they could easily shut off a supply chain, we saw this early on in the pandemic, right? With medical supplies, masks and stuff like that, surgical supplies, gloves, everything else. We had I don't want to say unfriendly, but we had a country that sources the majority of these products. They needed them as bad as we did, or even worse, right, early on in the pandemic. So one of our largest customers is a medical supply organization, right? And they couldn't get product. Okay, and some of the medical supply organizations in the United States were approached by the government over there, and they were requested to ship back to the country of production the goods that they had received here, because we hadn't had as widespread of a pandemic, right? So the underlying, how do I say this carefully, the underlying thing was, if you don't send us these products back, you're not going to be able to get more when production resumes, right? So I don't know that that's necessarily a position that organizations want to be in the future. So probably sourcing nearby, sourcing with countries that you have a good relationship with is probably a very wise decision. And I've seen firsthand the impact of when you're dealing with somebody that has too much power, too much control over your future or access to future production. So it is probably a valid point.
Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at the results and then we'll move on to our next speaker. Can we pull it back up again? Okay, looks like some combination. People are doing multiple strategies, which doesn't surprise me, but there are others there, about 9 or 10%. China +1, plus you can see the results there, or near sourcing is also popular. So it does say the same thing we saw before. People are moving their sourcing to other areas. Okay, with that, we're going to have, go ahead, Tim, and you can go ahead.
Okay, my microphone working? Yes, sir. All right, brilliant. Thanks, Ron. By the way, your bi-weekly updates have been great. A good data point as we navigated the last couple of years, so thank you. My job today is to give a real-life example of how we manage at Jockey, our strategic sourcing strategy. Can I throw in an impromptu question to this thing?
Absolutely.
Right. Has anybody here experienced supply chain disruption to their underwear purchases in the last 12 months? You put it down. Yeah, that's good. That's good news. Okay.
Just kidding.
I feel like I'm doing a good job then. Good. So, I mean, the past 2.5 years, we've heard a lot about words that Amy used before, like resilience, and words like agility. That's really been highlighted and put a spotlight under by the country shutdowns, whether it was China, then Thailand, then Vietnam, then all around Asia. It seemed every country was shutting down every other week early on. Shipping capacity, port capacity, the costs, and more recently, just crazy levels of inflation with commodities and input costs. So resilience and agility have been highlighted and put a spotlight on. Those who have had some resilience in their supply chain, we've benefited from that. Those who haven't, we've chased. And I think the reality is that we've all had to do a little bit of both. In the apparel world, our supply chain changes pretty quickly, and in the last year or so, we've moved from, like many others, from a deflationary environment to an inflationary environment. Really, for the last 25 years of my career, we call ourselves wandering garmentos. We wander around the world and we work out the right supply chain for various products, and we've been exporting deflation to the world, really, for apparel. Now prices are beginning to go up as we're passing on costs. We're moving from a world of available capacity to constrained capacity. So we talked earlier, that's partly driven by demand shifts in terms of services to goods, but also worldwide capacity is drying up as industries and factory groups and suppliers begin to consolidate. Things like first generation, second generation leadership, where the first generation isn't handing over to the second generation. So demand is increasing, supply is constrained. We've moved from more of a lean model well, with shorter lead times, now to a model of extended lead times, and very much moving from globalization to, I'm not sure what the right word is, we call it either deglobalization or regionalization. And to your point earlier about sourcing from friendly countries, we think a lot about that, whether it be trade agreements, but certainly we have thought about our footprint around the world as two camps. One camp is Team USA, and the other camp is Team C. And we try to think about who would Team C pick in their team, and who's Team America going to pick. And we're actively looking at how do we get the right balance between the two and not be too exposed to what we would call an unfriendly country. So all these things are happening. The spotlight's on the supply chain. We want to build resiliency. We want to build in agility. Things are going in the wrong direction. So really what this means is that we do need a true global sourcing strategy that supports the business not only for now, but also is going to support the business 2 to 3 to 5 years into the future. In doing this, there are no silver bullets. Well, I should have flipped my thing. There we go. There we go. That's our sourcing strategy. There's no silver bullets to any of this. No software solutions that you can sell, that you can buy off the shelf. No complex modeling of supply chains. All these things are inputs to it, but there's no silver bullets to this. In my view, it's the only way that you really truly get traction on a effective global sourcing strategy is through a really cross-functional approach that's continuously updated and is integrated into the business planning cycle. At Jockey, we do this every 6 months. We refresh our sourcing strategy and make sure that it stays relevant and up to date. But it's pretty difficult to do. Because you've got a lot of competing interests in your organizations, in the different silos. For me, I've got designers. Designers would love to design their product at the factories where it's easiest to design. Generally, they're pretty expensive factories, and they offer all sorts of services. I've got sourcing people. They're focused on costs and margins, so they're going to go the other direction. They're going to want to work with countries and with suppliers that are going to give us the best costs and the best margins. My planning teams, well, they really want the lowest lead times. They want the most flexibility built into the supply chain, and they want everything delivered on time. Merchandising and sales, well, they want us to support their category growth plans. Our quality and our compliance people, well, I suppose that we can give them quality and compliance. That's maybe a given these days. And our legal and customs and trade guys want us to utilise trade agreements, minimise tariffs, manage the risks with CBP, particularly the Uyghur Forced Labour Prevention Act and things like that. Lots of competing ideas, right? No one department is going to determine your country of origin strategy and your supplier strategy. But a good sourcing strategy is really led by the supply chain, and it's the balancing act of all of those things together. The slide here just tries to sort of show you all the different inputs that go into a good sourcing strategy, and trying to get the right balance is the key. So what does it look like for Jockey? Well, it starts with our corporate goals, our long-range planning, which then flows into our sourcing strategy. As I said, we do this every 6 months. The corporate goals don't necessarily change every 6 months, but the long-range planning changes, and we flow that down into our sourcing strategy, which includes a country of origin, which countries are we going to work in around the world, and then once you've decided that, how do your vendor strategies tie into that? And you can see a quick example of this. It's very simplistic, but country A, B, C, or D, what are we going to do? Are we going to grow? Are we going to decline? Are we going to hold? And what are some of the key initiatives or objectives we're going to set for each of these countries? That then flows down into each vendor. Well, we have many vendors, but we will work cross-functionally with our design teams, with our product teams, with our merchandising teams, with our quality teams, and our sourcing groups to all agree on the strategy for every single vendor. Because unless we agree that, we're just going to go off in different directions, and we're going to lose control of our sourcing strategy. I'll share with you my some very practical, very tactical guiding principles, which I think maybe pretty simplistic, but for any of your teams working on their sourcing strategies, I think these help guide our teams. The first point is about thinking, not just thinking for the year ahead, but thinking 3 to 5 years ahead. Where do we need to be? For us, examples for us would be, hey, Africa looks interesting. The average age is 19 years old. It's 1 billion people. It's forecast to grow. The apparel industry is pretty immature in that country. What are we going to do to develop the supply chain in Africa for the next 3 to 5 years so that we have a footprint there and that we can bring across the raw material base in Africa? Another example is made in America. We're beginning to make in America already, but the raw materials, the infrastructure, the people, they don't exist anymore. So we're having to build it ourselves and make the investments ourselves, but it happens over 3 to 5 years. You've got to ensure there's competition in the supply chain with the price pressures we have right now. For your top programs, who's going to compete when supplier A raises the price by 30%? You have to have the competition built into your supply chain. We never run out of capacity of core lines. For the 80-20 principle, for the 20% of products that make up 80% of our revenue, every single product is dual sourced. So we can pivot. If Myanmar closes down, we pivot to Thailand. If Thailand closes down, we pivot to Vietnam. And then we want to have some rules in place around exposure. So no single supplier would represent more than 20% of your business. And importantly, no country would represent more than 30% of your business. We look at this by category as well. And Nike found this out the hard way last year when Vietnam shut down unexpectedly. You would have seen the headlines, and Nike get probably 80% of their footwear from Vietnam. So simple things like this can prevent those sorts of problems. It's unhealthy to have a supplier where you are more than 50% of your business. If that's the case, just buy them and own them and run it, because you're going to be experiencing the same problems. And it takes a long time to bring in new suppliers, bring them in small and train them up. So these are principles that I think get down to that vendor level that fits into your country of origin strategy that can be very helpful for your teams. Okay. Oh, wait one sec. So in summary, you've got to finish with the summary, right?
All right, go ahead.
Yeah, exactly, right? So we have to build a solid supply chain strategy. There's no silver bullets. You've got to do it regularly. It can't just be something that you do once and put in a drawer. It needs to be integrated into the annual planning process, and it's got to be cross-functional. If it's just the sourcing team handing down a sourcing strategy, or the production planning team handing down a sourcing strategy, or just the design team, you're going to be sub-optimized. It's a team sport at the end of the day. And it's the role of the supply chain and the supply chain leaders to pull this together, because which other department's going to do it? Nobody. If we can do this, then I think we have the best chance of setting and building a more agile supply chain, a more resilient supply chain, and as we say, a supply chain that's going to protect our profitability. So, thanks.
Okay. All right, excellent points. Okay, this is the last audience question, so you know the gig, how to do it. I'll just read it and then go ahead and participate. What's the major factor one has to consider when moving out of China or any country? Strategically, sometimes people say I have a large business there, therefore I have to stay in China in order to manufacture goods to sell in China, as well as maybe import stuff from China. B, reduce logistics cost and inventory. C, total cost of ownership. E, continuity of supply, certainly critical. D, increase response time, improve customer service. Or F, other. Just take a minute, go ahead and just act as your company. The most highest one you think would be most important, then we'll take a quick look at the results, and then we'll have a wrap at Stephen.
I feel like we need to tell stories or something, yeah.
It'd be really a nightmare.
Yeah.
Okay? Oh, look at this. So it's a little hard for me to read here, but you can read it on your screen. But certainly continuity of supply is number one, a lot of different reasons, probably followed by total cost of ownership. So broad range, but I think all these things have to be considered in one shape, form, or fashion. It's what's important for you. So for this, we're going to turn it over. Stephen's going to give us some practical advice on what to consider.
Thank you, Don. So I'm sure many of you have been on this journey. For us, it's really gone back to the implementation of the tariffs, really redesigning our supply chain, really trying to move out of China. And then, of course, we went right into the pandemic, and then the great supply chain shortages, which we've now called the great excuse for everything in the world. I mean, when Buffalo Wild Wings is out of wings, that's a bad sign. So in this process, we just, as we go through trying to do this analysis, we've got roughly 10 questions we go through, a lot of very similar to what Tim had gone through. Just, before you go make a change, whether it's a regional change or you're looking to nearshore or reshoring to the US, just some questions, not overly intuitive, but the questions you should definitely ask yourself. So the first is, what is your company's business strategy, both marketing and selling in that country you want to move to or from? So what are the implications, really, if you leave that country? Do you leave along a strong presence there? Or is there a lot of ties to pulling that business out of there? Have you completed a risk assessment in the new country, including the brand perception? So a great example there, our company is Toshiba. If we are actually doing the opposite and we're looking to move potentially maybe some product into China, obviously the Chinese don't like to buy a lot of the Toshiba products. So those are things to consider. In addition, one of our largest customers, one of the largest retailers in the world, has announced hundreds of millions of dollars they're going to invest in made in the US, made in America. How does that factor into this decision? Any social issues to consider. So if many of you or future political issues as well, but hopefully many of you are aware that this new Uyghur Forced Labor Implementation Act is going into effect this coming week. Mm-hmm. So, forced labor, human trafficking, both becoming very predominant in the supply chain. What is the future direction of that? Are these regions that you're moving into, are they high risk for those type of sanctions from the government? Which is a very unusual one right now. You're actually presumed guilty at the onset. So you have to prove your innocence that you're not bringing in materials from this Uyghur region in China. Have you considered leveraging a partner? Obviously, if you can bring a partner in, that'll make your move a lot easier. And potentially help facilitate it a lot better, particularly where you don't have the experience. Kind of along the same line of consultants, so I know we have KPMG here. We actually do leverage KPMG quite a bit to help with tax guidance and helping us to set up in that country. So I strongly recommend bringing in some type of consultants, whether it's tax or really strong in that country to help in the decision. Total cost of ownership, including exit costs. The exit costs can be very expensive. Closing down the facility, regulations from that country of pulling out of it. Can you get your cash out of the country? All these things have to be really considered. Obviously, labor, production rates, warehousing. Can you get the raw materials in the country? So for example, we know the war with Ukraine is going to go on for quite a while. Does that country have a high dependency on neon and palladium, which is very important in the ECAT industry? The logistics and infrastructure, as Walter talked about, obviously ports and the logistics infrastructure is very important. Vietnam, for example, is very difficult logistically with the weather and monsoons and trying to get product in and out. So a lot of questions around the infrastructure. Trade agreements. And then lastly, as Tim said, this involves everybody in the company that has to be involved in the decision. It starts quite often with the supply chain. We lead it, we organize it, but you really can't do it without sales, marketing, legal, your compliance team if that's separate. So, these aren't overly intuitive, but these are some of the checklists that we go through, and hopefully you'll find that helpful. Okay.
Well, we have time for some questions, so if I ask that somebody could yell out a question, or we can maybe get a mic out there if that's possible. And particularly if you want somebody like Walter or Stephen to answer it, that'll be easy. Does anybody have any questions in the room here? Don't all speak at once. Speak up loud.
I'm not a professional in the global perspective, but I'm curious with China and the Soviet Union being most favored nations, how does that play into kind of the world logistics piece, right? It feels like not a lot of other countries have the infrastructures that a country like the Soviet Union or China has. But there's a lot of turmoil going on there also. The continent of Africa, I think it's the second most populous one in the world. I think that's a really interesting perspective there in terms of, how do you grow a business and make it viable and profitable in a continent like Africa, right? Or South America, I think brought Venezuela. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Anybody? Yeah.
Well, to be honest, people are starting to produce in countries like Haiti, Africa, garments, and certain other products. It takes time because the infrastructure has to get built, right? The ports have to get built, invested in. The consumer nations of the world probably could do a little bit more to help with the development of infrastructure, right? Roads, rail, highway, bridges. Even in, Walter's country, in the area of the Amazon, right? They're producing vehicles, they're producing a lot of different things there. And, our organization, corporate organization, we actually went and we built warehouses. We built, our component of the infrastructure to help manufacturers get material in, components in from different areas of the world. And then, once the completed units are done, to be able to, get them from the boxes into the containers and everything else. So it requires will, right, and a desire, and then certainly a strategic plan to be able to do that. And that's where some of the international organizations really could help to do this, because there certainly are a lot of poor nations that could use the work, they could use the revenue, they could put some of the general population to work, right, by allowing them to produce these things. And but again, people have to make the first steps. They have made baby steps, and it is starting, but it's going to take a long time, to be honest with you, at the pace it's going right now. But it's certainly a noble cause in my book.
Okay. Go ahead, Stephen.
Yeah, so just a question about the prediction associated with the change in sourcing and the upcoming peak season. So what does the panel think about what is this peak season going to look like on the sourcing strategy? Are people pulling goods in earlier? Or is it going to be a normal peak season like we saw pre-pandemic? What is the panel think?
So I'm going to ask to repeat it because I know we don't have mics in the audience. So people who couldn't hear it, Stephen's asking, we're approaching a peak season. What do you think is, what's the outlook for that, and what might be different or the same compared to previous years? Did they say it okay? Okay. Yep.
All right, Steve, we actually are working on this as we speak right now. We're looking at the purchase orders, and in many, many cases, we've had numbers of importers and retailers that have suspended shipments of certain products right now. And it looks like they're going to resume, some of them are going to resume furniture and some of the bigger, volume products on August 1st, right? So it seems like the peak is going to be maybe a little bit earlier, a little bit flatter, and but it certainly seems like there's going to be a surge kind of that midsummer period right now. We suspect that the fall season, right, where you're getting the Christmas goods in, the early fall, is not going to be as bad because a lot of people's Christmas goods from last season arrived in like Easter time, right? So a lot of people, we have some of our customers. I go to all our customer stores, and I was in a home goods store, if you will, and I'm looking and I'm seeing cartons, right, of slippers and different things with Christmas logos on them, right? So they just got there now, believe it or not. So they have a lot of inventory of Christmas decorations, holiday stuff that they'll be able to push out. So they won't need as many Christmas goods this year. But I think people are starting to, as they go through their inventory levels and they find out where the gaps are, as Walter discussed, they're going to still ship, but it may not be as as heavy. We hear right now in the last couple of weeks or last month, the carriers have more space. It's not so much of a demand right now for space. Some companies were able to renegotiate their service contracts, get lower rates, because the carriers started to see a downward pressure on the capacity. So failing a labor problem in July, which the current administration has been out on the West Coast. They have Zoom calls 3 times a week with labor and with management on the West Coast. The country does not want a labor problem. But if there is a labor problem on the West Coast, it's going to be a disaster. And the reason is because the unions in the Gulf, the union in the Gulf and the East Coast is going to probably extend sympathy, and there could be some coordination that's been going on. Some of that's been in the press. So everything goes smooth, we should be okay, Steve. But we should start to see some peak in August, September, maybe October. Beyond that, the next one is going to be right before Chinese New Year again, which is kind of traditional, as everybody pushed to get things out before all the factories shut down. So that's the best I can give right now, but we are watching that. And when we start to see the trend, we're actually looking at the purchase orders. On the Thursday call, we'll probably give a shout out and give everybody the update.
Okay, so we're pretty much out of time, but if there's one more question, if not, you can get some more coffee. Anybody have one more question for this illustrious group? Okay, go ahead. So let me just quickly repeat the question, because so he's asking the question about in Tim's strategy, which he has multiple players and people participate. What are the logistics people doing? Are they only doing? I'm going to kind of paraphrase what they're told. Are they coming to you with solutions? So go ahead, and if I got that right.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that it's often something we don't think about. So it should be in the list of the 10 things to think about, right? This is number 11. But sometimes we go to a new country, we start everything up, we get everything organized, and then we find out that the freight forwarder or the agent's office there just isn't very good. We certainly experienced that in places like Myanmar, when we went to Myanmar. We have issues in certain parts of India as well. But I think that the lesson for brands is that you really need to engage with the forwarders that you use. And to bring them along for the ride with you. So listen, I'm planning to get production out of Kenya or Ghana. Let's start to onboard your team. Let's start to explain the types of volumes we're going to be pushing through. Let's make sure we've got the equipment organized. So I think it's something as partners and as supply chains become more capacity constrained, we're going to want to work with fewer people more deeply. And I think that's probably the lesson for the logistics providers, is that you guys have to engage more with the brands, and the brands also have to think to engage with you. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So I think that's it. Let's give a round of applause for all the panelists here. Did an excellent job. Excellent job. Okay, come up. Amy's got something?
Wow, what a panel. Is it on? Is it on? Okay. Wow, what a panel, huh? That turned out really great. So I just wanted to say our peer group's coming up. Let's give one more round of applause. I'll tell you, these behind the scenes, there's a lot that went into the creation of this panel, a lot of great minds leading strategies. So I hope everybody took note. the general consensus, big thumbs up. So, but everyone's going to peer groups next. So the only thing I want to say, for those of you that are in Harbor View, it's actually going to be down the stairs. You go out just like you're getting a Starbucks coffee. May not be a bad idea, although we do have coffee out there now. And you're going to make a right and go all the way around. So it is on the first floor. Everything else is just right here in this area. We will be back here for lunch, and we're going to have a really fun activity for lunch too. So I definitely want to make sure you're back, and just enjoy the peer groups. Enjoy the event. Make sure you're competing on the app. So it looks like the points have changed. But I want to say thank you all for attending. I look forward to welcoming you back here at noon. That's when we'll have lunch. We'll have lunch first. It'll be fun. Time to chat, socialize, and then we're going to do a little fun activity. But one more round of applause for our people up here on stage. Woo! They did a great job.